What's up, everyone? Tera Roberts here, and welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy Show. We're the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. Today's show is going to be very fun. It is a free agency aftermath show, and I know what you're thinking. This is like the probably the 50th free agency show that you have listened to, or podcast that you have listened to this week. And I know it's been a long week for you, but this is a little bit different of a free agency show. I'm not doing a rundown of which players landed where. So it's not a big long list of all of that. The way that I am approaching free agency from this show is I am talking about my favorite free agency moves. I'm talking about my sleepers here. So now post free agency, who are guys that are now increased in terms of like a good sleeper value or good value picks from the moves that they made specifically in free agency. So it's a little bit different here. And then we'll be talking about some players to avoid. And we got out some winners as well. We'll do some winners as well. But really here, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the sleepers as well. So this is going to be a bit of a different free agency type of show. So if you are thinking like, oh my God, I've listened to free agency shows all week long, I cannot do another one, bear with me because we're going to do this one a little bit different. We're going to dive right into it because I'm getting started just a tiny bit late here. Let's start off with my favorite free agency moves here. Now, talking about my favorite ones, we've discussed this one before in the past. I have made a video of it on my YouTube channel, so this is not a shocker here. I feel like I manifested this one right here. Derrick Henry to Baltimore. It is above and beyond. I wanted nothing more this offseason than to see Derrick Henry in a Baltimore Ravens uniform. It was my prediction for Derrick Henry. It was my greatest hope for Derrick Henry, and it happened. I genuinely feel like, I feel a part of this, right? I feel like I was a part of this for Derrick Henry and the Ravens specifically, and that we did this together. That's how passionate I feel about this. I know it's crazy, but man, I am looking forward to this. I love Derrick Henry. You guys know me. I'm a Packers fan. And Aaron Jones. God, we'll talk about that one later. But obviously, my favorite running back is Aaron Jones with my fandom here. But if we remove fandom, my favorite running back in the NFL above and beyond is Derrick Henry. It's not even close. He's just, I feel like we're witnessing, we appreciate it right now. But I feel like when we're looking at this 20 years from now, looking back at our glory days of watching football and remembering this, we will remember just how wild Derrick Henry's career was and just how different he was. The man is just a physical anomaly. And obviously, his career has been fantastic. Looking at 2023, though, the workload was reduced. He went down to 280 carries, still had an 1,100-yard season, almost 1,200 yards. Average was, it was fine, 4.17 yards per carry, 12 rushing touchdowns. For most running backs, that's a fantastic year, right? But for Derrick Henry, he's built different. That was a down year for him. And, it might be a sign that, hey, 30 years old, things are starting to slow down. You're trending towards the end of your career. Not the end of the career, though, because he is Derrick Henry. But I think what this kind of lends us towards is pushing him to a landing spot where he doesn't have to be the 3 down back, and he can focus on what he's good at. We can get that reduced workload for him. We don't need to see him get those 350 carries. That would be amazing, but we don't need to see 30-year-old Derrick Henry get 350 carries. We need to see Derrick Henry at this point in the early down work and the goal line preference. And that is why I wanted him in Baltimore so bad, so he can transition to this literally perfect role for him, where he will have committee help. He'll have somebody on third downs. He'll have somebody spelling him on, a few drives here. But for the high value touches, that is where he is going to thrive. And Baltimore there was no better place for him to do it. I do want to point out, because in my celebration of Derrick Henry to Baltimore, you get a little bit of pushback there of people saying, hey, this is still the Russian attack is Lamar Jackson. And Lamar Jackson is an important part to this Baltimore run game for sure. But the thing that you got to remember about Lamar Jackson is that he is very different than Josh Allen. He's different than Jalen Hurts too. Lamar is a yardage kind of rusher. He is not a goal line kind of rusher, right? High touchdowns, It's happened in the past. And when we say high, we're talking about like 7 rushing touchdowns. He's not an extreme rushing touchdown at the goal line kind of guy. That's just not how they use him. And it makes sense because he obviously he's built a little slimmer. He's got that Josh Allen type of build, Jalen Hurts, a stockier type of build either. So it makes sense why Baltimore wouldn't really run him a lot at the goal line. Last year, the Ravens had 26 rushing touchdowns in 2023. That's obviously, just 1 touchdown behind the league leader. Lamar Jackson was only 5 of those. So when I'm talking about Derrick Henry and the possibility of him having 20 rushing touchdowns, I'm not joking. The opportunity exists for him in that offense. And Lamar is a yardage threat. He is not a goal line threat. This is such an ideal landing spot for him. From a fantasy perspective as well, when we're looking at, we love to predict what ADP is going to be. We don't have a ton to go off of other than best ball. And then we've got rankings as well. I'm hearing rumblings that some people have Henry as a top 5 back, like literally number 5. I can't get there. It's not a bad thing, obviously. Top 5 is very possible for him. I would just prefer to draft him as a low-end RB1. That's my preference there. If I've got to draft him as the 5th running back off the board, it's probably not going to happen for me. But as long as he's, in that low-end RB1 range, I can get there. So it's just going to depend on how ADP and rankings are shaking out. But he's an RB1. He is an RB1 yet again, and we're going to see just this vintage Derrick Henry goal line destruction that we've all been waiting for. Another favorite free agency move of mine, obviously Kirk Cousins. I understand the argument that he has the lack of success in the playoffs. I get that. And whose fault that is, whether it's him or whether it was Minnesota, whether it was a lack of a defense. Okay, we can, hey, there are arguments that could be had. But Atlanta, this was perfection for Atlanta. And it was perfection in terms of a transition for Kirk Cousins because he's transitioning to another off stem of the Sean McVay coaching tree. We've seen how he has thrived under Kevin O'Connell. So now he'll be able to transition this over to a very similar offense in Atlanta. So when we're looking at this and why I love this, it's not that I think that this is going to push Atlanta towards a Super Bowl, right? I don't think that's going to happen. I do think it pushes them to the playoffs, but I'm not concerned about the football part of the real football part of it. That's fun to watch, but I'm concerned about the fantasy football part of it. And from a fantasy football perspective, I don't need him to win playoff games in Atlanta. I need him to give the ball to Drake London, Kyle Pitts, to create opportunities for Breece Hall, for Bijan Robinson. That is what I'm looking for. And this is exactly what Atlanta needed. They needed that stable quarterback, that volume quarterback. They're going to actually transition to a functional offense now that is well-rounded and balanced. And Kirk Cousins is going to thrive in it. I am so excited for Drake London for this move. And when we're looking at it, obviously with Arthur Smith moving out, Bijan automatically got that boost here. But for Kyle Pitts and Drake London, this is going to be such a massive boost for their ADPs. Drake London's ADP is definitely going to skyrocket here. But I don't think it's going to be that bad to where we're going to have to be reaching to an unrealistic level. I don't see it getting to that top 12 level. We'll still be able to draft him as a wide receiver too, and that's beneficial. So it'll rise, but he's still going to be very, very attainable, and that's the good thing there for him. Kyle Pitts, I don't know if he's going to crack the top 5. It would kind of be there between him, consistently, generally speaking, Kittle is the tight end 5 in ADP and most people's rankings. Will he push forward over Kittle? I don't know if that's going to happen, but I still think that, we'll be able to get him at a decently reasonable price, probably in that 6 to 8 range there, 6 to 7, maybe even. So fantastic for these guys as well. And fantastic in terms of how I'm also looking at the other moves that the Falcons have made. The signing of Darnell Mooney, and we'll talk about the benefit for Mooney in a second because I love myself some Darnell Mooney. But this is also very beneficial for Drake London because as we got Kirk Cousins and we're excited, but we also kind of have that fear still sticking in us of wondering what's going to happen here. What are they going to do with that top 10 pick, right? And I see there are some comments. I'm going to get to those in a second, guys. Welcome in. But as we are looking at Drake London and the possibility of another wide receiver coming in there. The moves that the Falcons have been making, they still technically could use that pick as a wide receiver, and maybe it could be a Roma Dunze. I don't know, maybe. But the moves that they're making kind of make me feel more inclined that they're not going to go that direction. Mooney's contract, it's like a budget-friendly wide receiver too, someone that you don't super believe in, but they are capable of performing in that role. The trade for Rondale Moore screamed, okay, maybe we're getting a little wide receiver 3 here. Then they added Ray McLeod. That should roll right off my tongue. That's a Clemson guy as well. Ray McLeod, and adding him is a more depth piece as well. So we're starting to build out the depth within that wide receiver room, and that's good to see and beneficial for Drake London. So we still got to make it past the draft of them not adding a wide receiver with that top pick. But as long as that happens, we're looking at just a massive boost for Drake London and exactly what he needed. So the move for Kirk Cousins to Atlanta, just by far from a fantasy perspective, is just going to absolutely lift up these guys right here. We got the comment here. Yeah, we'll talk about Darnell Mooney in a second because he's in my sleeper portion here. Darnell Mooney will have a nice little dedicated section for him. Very excited about the move. Happy for him. Happy for him to get the money and happy for him to make this move. I love Justin. We'll dive into it, but I love Justin Fields. But technically speaking, seeing him with Kirk Cousins is going to be the upgrade that he needs to thrive for sure. Yeah, from there, hey, what's up? Cousins move breaks my Vikings heart. I know it hurts. It sucks for you guys. I really do. And it sucks that the move happened at the time that it did. So you had no backup plan other than going and getting Darnold. But at the same time, it means that more than likely you're going to draft a quarterback, get into that nice rebuild there. So hopefully everything works out. The only thing you got to worry about there is just making Justin Jefferson happy. Appreciate all the comments, guys. Happy that you're all in here with me. Comment from Zachary here. This year will be the test. Yeah, I love this comment. This year will be the test on long-term health of old QBs coming off of Achilles with Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins. And that is the one. So for the skill positions, the injury to Kirk Cousins and his recovery doesn't really make a massive difference in their ADP because we know that he'll be back at a reasonable time period, unless we get some kind of weird, over the next couple of months, some kind of weird timeline that he's not going to be able to make the beginning portion of the season, which I don't think is going to happen, but we'd get some kind of heads up on that one. But it is at least baked into Kirk Cousins' ADP. So when we're looking at Kirk Cousins, you're not going to be drafting him as a top 12 quarterback. I don't see any rankings out there, certainly not mine. I don't see any rankings out there of anybody putting Kirk Cousins as a top 12 quarterback, and not an insult to Kirk Cousins, but you bake in the risk of the Achilles. And then you also have to consider that, again, just the position for quarterback is just so strong from a fantasy perspective. When we're talking about guys that you can draft as low-end QB1s that have legitimate and proven top 5 upside, you can get Kyler on such a bargain. Jordan Love is still going as, QB 10, 11, 12, maybe even 13, depending on rankings. So there's so much value here. And that's the reason why, with Kirk Cousins, we're drafting him as a very late round quarterback. So the Achilles will tell the truth there for Kirk. Aaron as well. That'll be very interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on with Aaron, but we won't dive into that on this show. We're going to keep it positive. Question. I'll do a question here and then I'll dive into a promo as well. And then we have a nice mailbag. We're going to do a mailbag question early on this one because we got one that's related to one of my favorite landing spots. Question from Billy Bob. Who's a better stash? Wan'Dale Robinson or Rashad Bateman? Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm not a Rashad Bateman hater. I actually loved him coming out of college. And I thought theoretically Baltimore was the perfect landing spot for him. But it just feels like Rashad is more of a wide receiver 3 and not somebody that can carry that high consistent volume. And while I'm not saying that Wan'Dale can carry high consistent volume. At least the type of role that he plays does lend itself to some level of volume. So for me personally, it is Wan'Dale Robinson. Technically, if you're thinking about draft capital and whatnot, then yeah, it would be Bateman. But if you were going to lean towards one that you wanted to long-term plan around, value is higher for Bateman. But I think the potential longevity and fantasy value and, just consistent production leans towards Wan'Dale Robinson. If he can stay on the field and stay healthy, we get that quarterback situation figured out. And that's going to be interesting because the notification just came through right before I started the show saying that Drew Lock was sold on being able to compete for a QB1 to be the lead QB1. I'm such a fantasy person to compete to be the starting quarterback, which is interesting. But I challenge y'all to think, who's he actually competing to be the starting quarterback with? Are we sure it's Daniel Jones? Are we sure? He might have actually been told that, but they didn't specifically say if Daniel Jones was going to be there or if it was going to be him competing with a rookie. So I kind of buy into the fact that they did say that to Drew Lock, but they might not have said necessarily that he was competing with Daniel Jones. I'm just saying, I still think that they're going to draft a quarterback with that first pick. That's my opinion. Or some pick at least. I expect them to walk away with, at the very least, one of the top 6 quarterbacks from this draft for sure. It would be very irresponsible for them not to do so. Before we move on to my next, we got a mailbag question and onto my next favorite free agency move, which, spoiler alert, it is Diontae Johnson. Before we do that, we are going to hear a little word from our sponsor.
It has been 2 years since Josh Larkey paved the way for fantasy gamers to start expecting positive returns from pick'em games, specifically underdog pick'ems. And how do you do it? Well, you look at the slate and you find a great shootout or a sneaky shootout. You also look for a shit show game. 3, 4, 5, 6 guys in one game. That's right. You can do it. You can do it. And you can 100x your payout on underdog. Think about week 1. Jets-Bills was a shit show. Did we see the Aaron Rodgers injury coming? No, but we knew the Jets have a good defense. We knew the Bills have a good defense. Why not expect the worst? And the worst is what we got. So if you had gone Dalvin Cook less than, Garrett Wilson less than, Aaron Rodgers less than, Josh Allen less than, Gabriel Davis less than, boom, 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 you can go 6 for 6. Same thing in week 2. Oh, week 2. Oh, sneaky shootout there in Philadelphia. Minnesota's going to be in comeback mode, so we'll go Cousins, Jefferson, Hawkinson, more than. Madison, less than. But also, Swift, more than. Boom, 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 boom. That's how you do it with the underdog pick'ems, and you use promo code UNDERWORLD to get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. You put in $100, underdog matches that deposit up to $100 with promo code UNDERWORLD. Go start picking.
All right, let's dive back in. Okay, so yes. Let's do the mailbag question because that actually answers this right here. From Phobos456, what teams made the best trades and improved for the 2024-2025 NFL season? So the Brian Burns trade for Carolina, obviously, problematic in the fact that they should have done it sooner. And that is well documented. But ignoring that portion and from a fantasy football perspective as well, the big focus for me is the move that they made for Diontae Johnson. That trade was so slick, highly impressive. And technically not a free agent, but the trade, he moved during free agency frenzy. So technically it's like a free agency theoretical move, right? I love this trade so much. I was getting worried about Carolina. I'm not gonna lie. They weren't rumored to really be in it for Ridley. They weren't pushing for the T. Higgins trade. We didn't really hear anything. So you're sitting there kind of getting panicked. Like, are they really thinking that they're going into this season and Mingo is the wide receiver one? Are they that delusional? But they fooled us. They fooled us, and they pulled off a very slick trade right here. Because the person that they trade, Dante Jackson, they were planning on cutting him. This was going to be a loss regardless. So they managed to turn a guy that they didn't need on their team, or they were going to release anyway, flip that for a very, very cost-effective wide receiver. Deontay Johnson is only going to cost them $10 million this year. So they got a wide receiver one that is costing them $10 million this year. And then you have the cap space next year if you want to extend him. And he's still, if you're looking at general wide receivers on the market, he is still someone that is going to come in at a more budget-friendly cost. He's still going to have to, when you extend him, you're going to have to pay. But he's someone that you can have as your wide receiver one and is not going to be insanely breaking the bank like a T. Higgins. So when I look at this, I love this move for him. And I think it fits perfectly for what Bryce Young needs. Deontay, I know a lot of people have their feelings about him. Him moving on from Pittsburgh was probably the best. He didn't honestly, and this is not a football analysis thing. The man just didn't look happy. He looked frustrated. He looked checked out. And it looked like they were about to, if they had continued one more season, him and the Steelers were just going to come to a complete halt in terms of the relationships there. So just trading him now was probably the best thing for the Steelers. And the discount that the Panthers got was just unreal. And he's literally the perfect wide receiver for a young, QB, his second year for Bryce Young. But quite frankly, I feel like in theory, that first year should not have counted. It was a disaster, okay? We've got a new regime. We've got a new coach that is good at developing quarterbacks. And this is like the perfect little nice starter fit. It's like a nice starter wide receiver one, because Thielen was the wide receiver one last year. But technically speaking, right, this is his first true wide receiver one. Nothing too fancy. And it'll really help him develop here. And I love this, love this move for him. And I love this move for Deontay as well. So great for the Panthers, but also great for Deontay, because quite frankly, George Pickens was really, obviously we saw as the season continued, the breakout was just pushing further and further for him being the wide receiver one over Deontay. And that's just the direction that it was going to continue. So this gives him the ability to get back into a situation where he is the first look in the offense. And when we're looking at the Panthers as well, now they can, draft, if they want to draft a receiver with that 33rd pick, they can get a nice receiver, a nice wide receiver too, with some high-end potential. So overall, I think they made the right move for their team. I feel far more comfortable, provided that they, use a second-round pick to draft a receiver, feel far more comfortable with this receiving core and this team moving forward as a whole. So really love that Deontay Johnson trade so much. Let me show a comment here real quick. Yeah. Didn't know how it affected him fantasy wise with the trade. Honestly, and I was looking at his ADP earlier and I closed out the window on that. Not ADP, but the rankings on Fantasy Pros. But when we're looking at him, and got to consider that people have been soured towards Deontay Johnson in the past, and a lot of people don't believe in a potential bounce back season for, it's not even a bounce back season. It's just got to bounce forward. You'd have nothing to bounce back from because it was at the very at the lowest level right here. We're just trying to get you up to a workable level for Bryce Young here. So when you combine the feelings that everyone has for Deontay kind of souring, and then you combine that with a lack of faith in Bryce Young, Deontay's ADP is never going to get higher than a wide receiver 3. It physically can't. When you look at the top 24 wide receivers and who could kind of flex into that top 24, it just can't be Deontay. So again, we'll get a nice value for him. He'll be a nice mid-round pick. You don't have to reach for him. And it's good. You'll basically be drafting him as a flex option, not even a wide receiver too. So love it from a fantasy perspective for him. Let me see. We got another one here. Question from Tommy Taquito. Curtis Samuel to Buffalo or Mike Williams to Kansas City, who benefits more? We'll talk about Mike Williams in a little bit. Someone did a little, someone submitted a fun question there for Mike Williams. But Curtis Samuel in Buffalo is very intriguing for me. We do get kind of worried, though, if they draft another wide receiver with a decently high. I don't think they won't use a first round pick. But if they did, like, a second or third, and obviously we've got deep receivers in this class, you get kind of worried about how crowded things get with Stephon, with Dalton Kincaid, with Dawson Knox still there. Obviously, we're hoping that Khalil Shakir could have a breakout season or be a nice little sleeper pick right there. So it does you get kind of worried that, like, how crowded technically is this receiving core going to be. But I love the fit of Curtis Samuel in Buffalo. And you got to remember that, yeah, Curtis Samuel has been used kind of gadgety by Ron Rivera, because that's apparently what Ron Rivera just personally loves to do with him. But he doesn't have to be used gadgety. He doesn't have to be used in the slot. He can play all across the field. So I love Curtis Samuel to Buffalo. He's just one of those wildly undervalued receiver, and him with Josh Allen there, they could be some strong opportunity. Let's dive into, that was my last favorite, but now I want to dive into, and this will kind of be the bulk of the rest of the show for us, the top sleepers and value picks as a result of this free agency aftermath. So these are all guys who switched teams, all sleeper picks for me. I gave a little bit of a tip off there earlier when we were talking about Atlanta and Kirk Cousins and Drake London, that Darnell Mooney is one of my favorite sleeper picks. It is Darnell Mooney sleeper pick season. If you were with me previously in, what would it be, like 2022, which would have been the last year that he came. Yeah, 2022, I had him as a sleeper. It did not pan out, but he has got the quarterback now to be able to do so. I feel like when we talk about Darnell Mooney, there are two types of people. The people that believe that 2021 was a random blip and he's, just a guy and there's no potential there. And then there's the people that believe that his talent is real and then it was just Justin Fields that couldn't get him the ball. Now, I love Justin Fields, don't get me wrong. But I am more towards the second portion here, that he is talented. And it really was just the problem of Justin Fields not being able to get the ball to the wide receiver too, which is something he can develop. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying he can develop that. But it just didn't work out for Mooney, unfortunately. The targets, they just weren't very usable. They weren't very frequent, and he just suffered. But when we're looking at Darnell Mooney, specifically as a wide receiver too, is where I think he can thrive. I'm not delusional to think that he is an alpha wide receiver one. I was delusional in 2021, but we came back down to reality. He is a wonderful wide receiver too, and he can play so well off of Drake London. When we look at back in, I know it feels like so long ago, but when we look at 2021, that was that year that Mooney had that strong finished as a wide receiver too in fantasy. And believe it or not, that was the year that Allen Robinson was still on the team, and Robinson definitely struggled, but defenses were still treating him as the wide receiver one. It made sense that Mooney thrived opposite of him. So I really think that this is an excellent fit for him. Not the wide receiver one, wide receiver two, that can thrive off of playing opposite of an alpha. And again, as long as you have a quarterback and a system that can push volume to that wide receiver too, it's going to be a fantastic situation. And that is exactly what Darnell Mooney got. So I love this landing spot for him in Atlanta. I love him paired with Kirk Cousins, because we know Kirk Cousins is more than capable of supplying to literally 3-4 down the line. I mean, it's fantastic. He's a high volume quarterback, and Darnell Mooney is definitely going to benefit off of this. Comment here from Derek Lincoln. Believe Mooney will be good wide receiver with Kirk Cousins. It's just going to be so fantastic. Let me jump to this one right here from Billy Bob. Did the Bengals get faked out by Zack Moss? He only had one good season with the Colts offensive line. This is perfect timing. Thank you very much, because my next favorite sleeper pick is actually Trace Brown. For that exact reason. No offense to Zack Moss. I like Zack Moss. I think this was a good move for for Cincinnati. They wanted to move on from Mixon. They wanted to do it last year. Mixon took the pay cut. I don't think it sounds like they didn't really give him the opportunity this year. Just decided, hey, this is the best move, best situation. Cincinnati was kind of savage this offseason, right? Tagging T. Higgins, knowing that basically what they were doing, knowing T. Higgins wanted the trade, cutting Mixon, then say, well, not cut. We're trading you to Houston. Worked out for Mixon regardless, but kind of a little bit of a savage offseason for Cincinnati. But yeah, this comment right here, did the Bengals get faked out? No, I don't think the Bengals got faked out. Because when you look at the contract, it's basically $4 million a year. Now, granted, I don't know which, off the top of my head, I don't know guarantees, but just the overall money, essentially $4 million a year. Comparatively speaking, that's not a starter contract. They didn't give Zack Moss a starter contract. What it looks like is that they wanted, in my opinion, for them to push Chase Brown forward. But you can't really have him be the only back. And it was very, very much so proven that no other back that they had on their roster was, quite frankly, capable of stepping up. They had their opportunity. Because if you remember, Chase Brown missed a significant portion of the season with an injury. Nobody else stepped up. It was just Mixon. And when Chase Brown came back and finally got that opportunity, he thrived. We know there's a clear separation between Chase Brown and everybody else on that roster. But at the same time, you can't be irresponsible and say that, Chase Brown is our RB1 and we got no backup plan. So I think they brought in Moss with the intention of this operating as probably a well-oiled committee, and they play well off of each other. Chase Brown is a 3-down back, right? But he's got that receiving upside. Zack Moss, he can catch balls, but really you want him in that or there for that early down work as well. So when we're looking at it, it meshes as a fit. And in my opinion, what's going to happen here is because we do have a lot of fantasy managers that do feel passionately about Zack Moss. So we'll start to see right now, Zack Moss and Chase Brown in rankings and ADP are going to be butted up right next to each other, right? Because that's what happens. You get a committee and people are like, okay, we don't know exactly how this backfield is going to be split. These guys are just going to be put back to back right here. But I think what's going to happen is that they'll start to separate a little bit. Zack Moss will start to get pushed up, right? And as he starts to get pushed up and we start to get a little bit of a value dip on Chase Brown, that is the direction that you want to head. You want to go with the guy who in this, ambiguous backfield, this committee backfield, is the one that has the lower ranking, the potentially higher upside, and the receiving upside as well. And that is what Chase Brown has on his side. And when we're looking at this again, it can start off as a committee, but I do think that Brown is going to separate himself. So, again, just look at the money. Moss is not a massive commitment in this offense. It is not starter money. It's literally half of the money that Tennessee gave Tony Pollard in a backfield that will probably be a committee anyway. So Chase Brown is the guy that I like to come out of this backfield as the most productive. So he's one of my favorite sleepers, my favorite value picks. I'm excited for Chase Brown's season. I was in on Chase Brown's season last year. I was one season ahead. Happened towards the end, but this is where we're finally getting it here. I say finally, he's a second year back. So moving on to another sleeper pick here. This one is going to potentially frustrate some of you guys, but hear me out on this one. Austin Ekeler is less of a sleeper and more of a value pick. So not technically a sleeper, right? Because he's not super far back, but a good value pick here. And the reason why is that, hey, we're not drafting Austin Ekeler as the Austin Ekeler that we were drafting as a first-round running back, okay? He's going to have his ADP significantly depressed. He will be an RB3 at best, and we need to look at him and evaluate him in the context of what this new offense will be in Washington. And when you look at this new offense in Washington and you say, we got Cliff Kingsbury here, we got to jump way back to Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona and look at the receiving backs there. Receiving backs thrive in Cliff Kingsbury's system, right? Chase Edmonds, I know, go back and remember it. Chase Edmonds did very well. In 2021, Chase Edmonds and James Conner had a combined 80 receptions under Cliff Kingsbury. Even Kenyon Drake thrived under Cliff Kingsbury. Remember Kenyon Drake? Yeah. He remembered. Yeah. Remember Kenyon Drake thrived under Cliff Kingsbury. So look at this. Take your opinions out of it in terms of feeling like Austin Eckler lost a step. Look at this as him in his new role as the third down back, the change of pace back here, receiving work, in an offense that is going to have a new rookie quarterback who could be checking down a decent amount here, and just reshape how we're looking at this. Don't look at him as Antonio Gibson's replacement, right? Don't look at this and say he's getting Antonio Gibson's production, because that production doesn't really exist now. We're in a completely different system. This is a new regime. We have to look at it for the potential of what these running backs will be under the offense that Cliff Kingsbury is going to run. So when we're looking at Austin Eckler and his ADP being an RB3, a mid RB3 at best, we're talking about a guy that we are drafting as a handcuff, a high-end handcuff that will have standalone flex value. That is what I'm saying here. Just remember that when we're looking at Austin Eckler and you're looking at me like I'm crazy saying there's no way that I'm drafting Austin Eckler, remember that you are drafting him literally at best as an RB3. The ADP is going to be super depressed. So you don't got to worry about it, man. It's nice and relaxed. And we're taking Austin Eckler and we're changing our vision of what he's going to be. It's handcuffing time with standalone value. He is entering his Jerick McKinnon era. Oh God, that's so awful. He is entering his young Jerick McKinnon era right here. A little bit higher production, right? But that's kind of where he's teetering towards. So just hear me out on that one. He is going to be a value pick this year. Another guy that is one of my favorite value picks, and I will not acquiesce on this one. My opinion is not going to change on this one. The Chuba Hubbard disrespect, I don't understand it, and I can't get on board with it. He's an RB1. He is the RB1 of that Carolina offense, and it's not even a question, right? He stole the job from Miles Sanders. It's not going back. They are not switching it up, right? They're not switching it up here and saying that Miles Sanders, they're going back to it, because their GM already said that Chuba Hubbard is the lead back. When the GM comes out and literally says, this is our guy right here, they don't add anyone in free agency. And even if they added someone in the draft, considering all the needs that Carolina has, they're not drafting a running back with any significant draft capital. Chuba is the RB1 of that offense. And when we're looking at that offense, again, we're talking about free agents, and a lot of these free agents are going to teams with brand new, the vast majority of them, honestly, that I've brought up are guys that are going into new systems, new coaches. So you gotta pull it back and think about what he can be in the context of the offense that Dave Canales is going to bring to Carolina. So when we're looking at Chuba Hubbard and looking at his stats from last year, essentially he kind of took over as the lead back in week 6. There were a couple of weeks in there where Miles Sanders, he had returned from an injury and kind of had a typical or a temporary increased workload. But for the most part, from week 6 on, Chuba Hubbard was the RB1 of that offense. He was overall the RB19. That's pretty significant right there, considering that he is being drafted woefully low, right? And he averaged 12.5 fantasy points. Not fantastic, right? He had a low ceiling and a low floor. It was just not fantastic, but that wasn't his fault, right? It was not a good team. Passing game was not a threat. Defense was strong enough to where the games were kind of close enough that no one really benefited from having to chuck the ball, dump it off. They weren't, there was not a massive amount of receiving workload for these running backs to have. But looking at this Carolina offense, we already talked about Deontay Johnson here, but they improved their offensive line. They improved their receiving core. They improved their coaching. They're moving forward in a positive direction. So when you're looking at last season as more of the baseline for Chuba Hubbard, and then you consider what his ADP is, he is going to be a solid value pick and someone that you can target and get some strong value out of. So I do love him. And then there's one more thing to consider as well when we're looking at Dave Canales. Look at the way that he utilized Rachaad White last season. Rachaad White obviously didn't thrive from a yards per carry perspective, right? It wasn't a fantastically, granted, he had his games where he would, pop off on the ground. But overall, there were often a lot of games where he struggled to find room, right? He struggled in terms of yardage. When we're looking at that, we got to consider the fact that even if there's not a significant increase in yardage and yards per carry for Chuba Hubbard, the pass catching opportunities that Rachaad White saw in that offense could funnel over to Chuba Hubbard as well. He would be the back that they would be utilizing as a pass catcher. So that's my justification there for Chuba Hubbard. Take it for what it's worth. He is someone who I think is really going to benefit from this change in the offense here. The Panthers have a lot of things to work on, right? But there is only room to go up. And the key thing here is that we're looking at a guy that we know is the RB1, and that is not going to change. And you don't need to panic over. They're not going to suddenly say, we're paying Miles a lot of money. I think we really got to make Miles the RB1 again. No, not going to happen. So let me go to the chat here for one question around Chuba Hubbard. Who is the better season here? Oh gosh, this is a good question. Who is the better season? Chuba Hubbard or DeAndre Swift? Oh, man. This one is tough because I do ultimately think that Swift is going to be the lead back. Now, granted, Khalil Herbert is not going to go away, right? Roschon Johnson might be mildly involved. But I do think that ultimately Chicago does want to move forward without running a sloppy committee, which is essentially what they were running last year, a sloppy committee where they kept moving back and forth between who they were giving the better workload. I think finding consistency and commitment to one back is the direction that they need to go. And I do think that that's what they will utilize Swift for. That said, looking at the offense as a whole, it's going to be difficult because obviously we've got a rookie we don't know for sure, but more than likely we've got a rookie quarterback coming in here. Then we've got DJ Moore, obviously. And the likelihood here is that second first-round pick is going to be used on a wide receiver. Technically, it mocks out to be Rome Odunze, which I don't know how I feel about that because I want Rome to land in a wide receiver one opportunity, and I don't know. Competing with DJ Moore is going to be rough. But that said, I think the offense will function a lot better this season, even with a rookie quarterback, Caleb Williams. I know we have a lot of skepticism baked in terms of what Caleb Williams can actually be. I don't know if you guys have skepticism, but as I scroll through TikTok, and oh my gosh, I made a TikTok video about a month ago on Caleb Williams, and Jesus Christ, the comments, my goodness. The level of Caleb Williams bust, Caleb Williams hate, Caleb Williams awful comments was just, I couldn't even go back and look at it. It was unreal. That said, he is talented. And whether or not you believe he is going to be a bust, Chicago is making the moves to improve this offense as a whole. So DeAndre Swift going into this offense that can and is very capable of having a strong run game if they actually commit to a solid run game and run plan with a single back, right? The pass game should improve. Overall offense should improve. Defense is improving. We already saw it improve at the end of last season. The difference between their first half and second half defense was unreal. So they're heading in the right direction. Ultimately, I would prefer to draft DeAndre Swift. ADP technically might play a little bit of a role in that because I can see Swift's ADP rising up to a point where it gets a little weird maybe, and there's better options at wide receiver or tight end for you to take at that point. So maybe it'd pass over for that reason. But I think Swift would have the better season. I'll probably end up with more Chuba Hubbard on my teams, though. I know that's weird, but I do think that Swift will have the better season, more likely have the better season, but not by a lot. Not by a lot. And the value that you could get for drafting Chuba Hubbard later than Swift might be pretty significant. I do think Swift's ADP is going to rise quite a bit, especially as we start to see those training camp videos and the rumors of him as RB1. It's going to get, because we, and myself included, love ourselves some DeAndre Swift and know the ceiling that he has and the opportunities that he has. And if he actually gets some goal line work in this offense versus with Philadelphia, it's going to be fantastic. Moving on. We're going to go to sadder information. We're going to go to the players that I will be avoiding in fantasy drafts from the free agency aftermath. Okay, we're going to increase the negativity here. I'm going to start the negativity off with Aaron Jones, which I hate because I love Aaron Jones, but I'm so sorry, Aaron Jones. I'm happy that you landed in Minnesota. I'm happy you got a decent contract. I'm happy you didn't have to wait and get into an awkward situation. So that's all good for you, but I don't like this landing spot. If I could have picked another one, I absolutely would have. Because I was so ready to dive heavy into a strong bounce back season for Aaron Jones, because hamstring injury aside, once that was finally healed up, he was good to go. And from my perspective, when I look at hamstrings, like if your knees start to get bagged, that's one thing, but hamstrings attack literally everybody, right? It does not discriminate in age. Deontay Johnson got it. Justin Jefferson got it. Keenan Allen had it the year before as an old man and bounced back perfectly. So hamstrings, it's an issue in season. For me, it doesn't carry over to how I evaluate you the next season. So I was ready to dive in 110% with Aaron Jones, right? But the problem here is that I don't think he's going to be utilized as a 3-down back here, which is fine. He's not always been utilized as a 3-down back in Minnesota. But the problem is if you're not utilized as a 3-down back, you have the exact same profile as Ty Chandler. They profile very similarly there. And now you're in an offense that doesn't actually prioritize throwing to running backs. That is the major issue here. Minnesota was bottom 10 in targets to running backs. And it makes complete sense why that's the case, right? If you have Justin Jefferson, you have Jordan Addison, and you have TJ Hawkinson. And then you can even add in guys like KJ Osborne, right? Like you're deep. You have so many receivers to throw to. Why are you dumping off the ball to running backs? You're not. Doesn't make sense when you have that many weapons. And I don't think it's going to change. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to change. So if we are taking away the opportunity for you to be a 3-down back, because that's typically just not how you've operated, and you are, older now. So that's more than likely not going to be the case throughout an entire season. So we're taking that away. We're taking away the receptions, and then we're putting you into an offense that could be on the struggle bus, right? Because we've got Sam Darnold at quarterback. Our best case scenario is that they get JJ McCarthy. That's the best case scenario. Regardless of how you feel about JJ McCarthy, he's a rookie. He'll be a rookie coming in. CJ Stroud coming in as a rookie, that's a completely different situation because his assets are NFL ready, right? He came in with the accuracy. He came in with the intelligence. He came in with those NFL ready qualities. JJ McCarthy, more of a raw talent development, right? And so we throw him into an offense, assuming this is the, situation. We throw him into Minnesota. Is that offense going to thrive in the way that it did under Kirk Cousins? Probably not, right? It's going to take some time. So less goal line opportunities. Everything just here is just unfortunately kind of a potential downgrade for Aaron Jones. And his ADP, from what I've seen, is not going to drop drastically, right? You're still going to be drafting him as a mid RB2, maybe like a slightly low end RB2, but I don't think that he's getting to that point where we'll be drafting him for, in that, 20 to 24 range, right? I think you're going to have to draft him, close to a top 20 back, because people are still going to have that perception that he's the RB1 in Minnesota. Therefore, it's Aaron Jones. You're not getting that discount. I can't do it. I'm sorry. I hate it. I'm going to have to be avoiding Aaron Jones, unfortunately, this season, especially considering that I don't rule out the possibility that they also add in a bigger back, right? Because if you're looking at Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler, is that the only backs that you're going into? No, they're probably going to add in somebody who's, a little bit bigger, can handle a little bit more early down work. So it just could get into a messy situation, unfortunately. And then other players I will be avoiding. I'm staying in Minnesota, unfortunately. I'm avoiding Jordan Addison. Same situation here, unfortunately. Same justification, really, in that Justin Jefferson, obviously, for whoever is at quarterback, be it Sam Darnold, be it JJ McCarthy, be it they wait on a quarterback and it's Bo Nix or something, right? Justin Jefferson's going to be the first look. Inconsistencies are going to come for Jordan Addison, unfortunately. I just don't know if we're going to see the type of production where we feel super comfortable with him as our wide receiver 2 or our wide receiver 3. We'll be plugging him in as a flex option, hoping that this is the week that he can get a touchdown. And it's nothing negative to do with him. It is literally just that this offense could struggle a little bit and could be working through some growing pains if they are starting a rookie at quarterback here, or if they're starting Sam Darnold. It is what it is, right? Do we really, we know who Sam Darnold is. So unfortunately for me, given that rookie quarterbacks love their wide receiver ones, given that Sam Darnold is, Sam Darnold, I think that Jordan Addison is the wide receiver that really suffers in this position, unfortunately. So, and also remember that JJ McCarthy is not a lock to go to Minnesota. I've seen some people that are like, it's basically a lock now that JJ McCarthy will be going to Minnesota. It's not. Do not count out don't count out the Giants trading up. Don't even count Vegas as well. Don't count out Vegas as well. They could be trading up also. So Denver as well. It is not a lock here. So Minnesota is not out of the woodworks here. They're going to have to fight for their quarterback. So just keep that in mind, that the offense in Minnesota could be a little bit shaky here. And the only guy that we know that we can trust in this offense is going to be Justin Jefferson. And I will probably draft TJ Hawkinson just because his ADP is so depressed from the injury that it's worth it. You can draft him as tight end, tight end 12, 13, something like that. The ADP is not super high at all. So those are the only two guys that I'll be looking at. And then let's jump to mailbag questions here, because we've got a couple more that we want to do before we wrap up here. I'll probably cover free agency again, because quite frankly, I had a ton of information. We've still got winners as a whole to go over. We've got best rookie landing spots as a result of the aftermath of free agency. And we've got the worst moves. I didn't even get into the worst moves. Spoiler alert. It's the Tony Pollard in Tennessee was very questionable in my opinion. Jacksonville putting themselves into a tough situation, unfortunately. Not their fault. They thought, they were getting Ridley back. But we'll dive into some more free agency stuff in next week's episode as well. But diving into some mailbag questions here. This one is fun. From Chuck Bass, FF. Would you give up assets for T. Higgins or sign Mike Williams on a modest deal? Oh, this is a good question, because I feel like T. Higgins and Mike Williams are very similar in terms of the injury rap that they get, right? Age difference is really the obviously big factor here, but we harp on T. Higgins' injury issues. I think it feels a little bit more drastic than it's actually been. Last year was terrible. There's no getting around that. The lack of production, inconsistencies, the injuries kept popping up randomly and whatnot. But outside of that, in 2022, technically he did play 17 games. In 2021, 14 games. In 2020, 16 games. His injuries are not that drastic. I just feel like it feels a lot worse than it actually is because of Zack Taylor's weird choices, like to put a player out there for a couple of snaps versus truly like coming out and saying, hey, this man's going to be limited. Like if it were a situation where, we were told over and over again that Christian Watson was going to be injured, like Green Bay, they were very clear. Christian Watson is going to be limited. Aaron Jones is going to be active, but he's going to be limited. They're transparent, and we saw those clear results out there, right? So when we're talking about T. Higgins, we got to remember that Zack Taylor has played some weird games with injuries and how the players have been utilized, right? But overall, it feels a bit more dramatic than it has actually been. Mike Williams' injury history, somewhat similar to T. Higgins, but here's the difference between Mike Williams and T. Higgins for me. Other than last year for T. Higgins is basically a lock for around 1,000 yards, 6 or 7 touchdowns. He's a strong wide receiver 2 who could be a wide receiver 1, theoretically, if he got into a location where he was actually allowed to be a wide receiver 1 and didn't have to contend with playing opposite of a guy like Jamar Chase. Mike Williams, on the other hand, highly inconsistent. Production straight up all over the board. There is no way to predict exactly what you are getting out of Mike Williams, regardless of an injury, on a given, yearly basis. And when you're looking at him and the fact that his wide receiver production has just been all over the board at 29, the modest deal, it feels okay. I'm not opposed to it, but I would, as a franchise, rather make the investment into T. Higgins. because Mike Williams is who he is, and that's fantastic. And if you don't need him to be a wide receiver 1 or even a wide receiver 2 on your team, right? Maybe you need him to just be the third look at the option. Like, hey, you've got a Travis Kelce, you've got a Rashee Rice, Mike Williams. It's just going to be the third look in your offense. So it's not that big of a deal. But if I'm looking for somebody who I want to make that investment into, T. Higgins, I know the potential for him to be a wide receiver 1 is out there if he gets into the right spots. So I would rather give up the assets for T. Higgins. That is just me. Before I move on to the next mailbag question here, because it's 2 in a row, they're kind of the same ones here. I did want to show this comment here because I'm 100% with you, Derek. I went on a nice little rant on Twitter about it. I think it was like a 3-tweet rant of just over and over again, my frustrations. Yeah. The Titans, like, why would the Titans add Tony Pollard when you have Tajay Spears that plays exactly like him? That was my big issue. Why are you making an investment? And we'll talk, like, I will deep dive into it in the next episode. But when we talk about worst landing spots and worst moves, easily the Titans, because why are you making that investment into a running back when you have an exact duplicate? You didn't go out there and get 2 backs that complement each other. You got the same back. Very, very oddly enough, you got the same back, but one was just less productive and struggled at the goal line last season, and you had visual proof of that. Now, granted, that could have been he's not a workhorse running back. And as the season, went on, it just was a little bit of a struggle for him. B, he was coming off of that injury. So there are reasons, but as a whole, Tony Pollard, I would have loved to see Tony Pollard in LA with the Chargers, to see him in a committee role where you would have, you got Gus Edwards. They made that right move. They got Gus Edwards, right? Taking that early down work. And then you have Tony Pollard coming in as the electric change of pace back. That is exactly what I want to see out of him. With Tennessee, how are you going to have 2 running backs that are playing off of each other as the electric change? You can't. So we're going to go from electric change of pace to electric. It's weird. Like what was the thought process there? And that's not even like a bias like Tajay Spears truth. I have 0 shares of Tajay Spears because I was like, the knees. I don't know about all that. A little bit. A little bit hesitant. So I have 0 shares of Tajay Spears. I don't have a dog in this fight. And it makes 0 logical sense to me as to why they would do it, especially when you consider if Tajay Spears has the knee problem where we know it's not going to be an issue when he's young, right? It's just that his career might not have longevity. So if that's the case, don't you want to ride out the rookie contract? Don't you want to use up the good years early? Why are you're not extending the career by making it a committee? His knees are what they are. It's a time issue, right? So I just, so frustrating. 0 shares of Tajay Spears. It just makes 0 logical sense as to why they went out and did that. If you were going to add somebody, it needed to be an early down. Like, you should have added Zack Moss. That plays well off of Tajay Spears. If you didn't think that Tajay Spears could handle the workload, add a Zack Moss. It's very simple. Like, what was the logical thought process there? Like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Or even the Texans with Pierce and Pollard would have been good. Yeah. Like, there's so many, I hate it for Pollard because there was so many better locations where he could have gone to be the back where he would have been, like, just originally what we saw him as. He could have even stayed in Dallas, right? And they, draft one of these bigger backs in the draft and, have one of those guys play off of Tony Pollard. There was opportunity, and I feel like it just got botched, but we'll see how that works out. I'm not a fan. But moving on to the last 2 mailbag questions because they play off of each other. The first one here from T-Mills70SW. Is Barkley a top 10 pick? This is the question of the hour. I have seen it everywhere. For me, he's just outside, just barely. I would rather have Barkley than Gibbs. I feel confident in that I would rather have the guy that I know is the 3 down back, who I know does not have committee competition, right? In an offense that I do feel like could lean more towards providing him more goal line opportunities. So I do think I would rather have Barkley over Gibbs. But I think the debate lies in whether you prefer Jonathan Taylor or Saquon Barkley. I think that's the cutoff right there for the top 10 pick from my perspective and how I line up the receivers that would go ahead of them, right? And why that just kind of pushes Saquon just out of there. I'd rather lean towards the youth of Jonathan Taylor. over Saquon Barkley. But again, like just defending Saquon though, because it feels like it's going to be one of our hotter debated topics over the offseason, right? Because people are concerned. We talked about it a little bit earlier when we were talking about what were we talking about? Kellen Moore in the offense, right? We talked about this and the fact that when we're looking at Saquon Barkley, and people are going to be debating this as to whether or not, it was a question. Somebody had a question debating whether or not he's going to have those goal line opportunities or if he's going to be hurt in this situation playing on the Eagles. We got to remember, I'm seeing a lot of comparisons here of people saying, hey, this is what Miles Sanders did. This is what DeAndre Swift here did. So this is what we can expect from Saquon Barkley and what he's going to be able to work with. So yeah, and no. The Eagles didn't bring in Kellen Moore to run the same offense they had last year. Kellen Moore is going to bring his own offense, right? They didn't bring him in here to just exist and be a figurehead, right? So I feel like the big thing with free agency that we got to focus on is that you can somewhat, but you can't look at what the offense did last year. If there was a change in coordinator or a change in regime as a whole, you can't look at that and say, this is the opportunity that we have this year, because things are going to be different, right? So what I think is going to happen here with Saquon Barkley is that we are going to see more goal line opportunities for him than we saw from DeAndre Swift previously. So I think the opportunity will be there. He is talented. The yardage will be there. Touchdowns won't obviously be at the level of a Jonathan Taylor, which is why I lean that direction with him, but it's still going to be there, right? Don't count it out and say, hey, receptions are going to be this because this is what DeAndre Swift had. These are two different situations, two different offenses. Things will be slightly different here. Let me see. We got a question, or what was this here? In a dynasty league, where would you rate Saquon Barkley in running backs then? Off the top of my head, I have not updated dynasty rankings. I'm not going to lie. I have not updated my dynasty rankings. So off the top of my head, I don't 100% know. But for me, I do think there's still value in him and feeling comfortable with him in that offense and feeling like we do have multiple years for him. So I'm perfectly fine if maybe you're looking at him and if there's skeptics or somebody's wanting to sell in your league, making a purchase as a contender for sure for Saquon. And then this one right here, this one is actually, this ties in perfectly to the other mailbag question that we have here. So the comment that we're showing in the chat here is from Derek. I believe the Eagles will do less tush push without Jason Kelce there as well. And the mailbag question that I have is from @DM_underdog. How much does Saquon cap Jalen Hurts rushing touchdown upside? I think this is the way that we have to look at it. I don't think we need to look at this as how much is the tush push going to take away from Saquon? How much is Jalen Hurts going to take away from Saquon? I actually think we should be looking at this as how much is Saquon going to take away from Jalen Hurts? That's the way that I think we should actually be approaching this with him. Because arguably you can say if they never felt like they had comfortably had a goal line back and the easiest route was to just use Jalen Hurts, then yeah, that's the route that they went. But we do have changes in offensive line, and we do have potential more goal line touchdowns that can go towards Saquon. So it will take a little bit from Jalen Hurts, in my opinion. That said, Jalen is still a top 5 quarterback. I don't think that it's going to drastically adjust anything because I think we're going to get a balanced system here, right? For every goal line opportunity that leans towards Saquon and is taken away from Jalen, again, remember, look at what Kellen Moore will bring to this offense. He is going to bring pass volume. He did for Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. The overall numbers don't look like it, but you got to remember they were shortened by the injury. It was a strong bounce back season, and it was actually really strong for Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen, considering that the Chargers actually had a schedule that was very difficult from a pass perspective. They faced defenses like New England, Baltimore, Kansas City, the Jets, even ones where, you have Denver, obviously rushing was a little issue for them, but corners have never been an issue for them. So they faced strong pass defenses. And despite that, Justin Herbert did have a strong season, a strong bounce back season. I think that Kellen Moore brings that to the Eagles. So for every goal line opportunity that we may lose with Saquon Barkley, I think we're going to see a stronger air attack and more touchdown opportunities through the air to make up for Jalen potentially lacking at the goal line as well. So I'm not super concerned there. We'll do one more question here. There we go. Yeah, one more question here. Should I trade Keenan Allen for 2024 second rounders? It depends on where they are. I would 100% do 2 late round second rounders, and assuming that's super flex, I would do 2 late round second rounders for sure. If they're early round, that's where things start to get a little bit shaky, in my opinion, of doing that. If one was early and one was late, maybe I would do that. The early rounds, I'm still obviously, draft is going to make the actual NFL draft is going to really shake things out for us. But I do still believe that we'll have some strong opportunities at wide receiver in the early second round. So just keep that in mind. If it's 2 late second rounders for sure, 1 late and 1 early, then yeah, I would make that. Yeah, Keenan Allen. I love him so much. The only thing we obviously got to get concerned with is that the offense is changing. But no Mike Williams. We'll see. We'll see how all this goes. Still a believer in Keenan Allen, especially for a contender. Appreciate it, Derek. All right. That is it. That wraps things up. Thank you all for sticking around. Really good show. Really good chat as always. People don't understand how good the chat is in here. You guys always ask fantastic questions. So if you're watching this on replay or listening to the podcast, it is always good to get into the chat because it is always fun. Good questions, good vibes. Overall, really, really appreciate it. And appreciate the mailbag questions as well. That wraps things up. Again, if you have any questions, you can tag me on Twitter. I'm there all off season at It's Tera Time, ITSTERATIME. You can tag me multiple times because I never get offended if someone's like, hey, you didn't respond. Like, oh, I'm sorry. I must have had a little ADD moment and missed it. But if you are listening to the podcast version, please subscribe. Yeah, if you guys haven't noticed, I got a mild case of ADD right here. That's why I jump every now and then, but you stick with me and I love it. If you're watching on the podcast version, please subscribe. It would be greatly appreciated. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like the video, drop me a comment, make sure that you're subscribed to Player Profiler as well. We'll be back again probably next week. I know sometimes we skip a little week here, but we'll be back more than likely next week, kind of wrapping up this free agency recap because we didn't even touch how things are affected for potential rookie landing spots. We didn't even get into the losers and the bad moves here. So we've got a ton more to cover here. I didn't even cover my winners. I covered my favorite guys, but I didn't cover my winners. Guys like Kyron Williams, Rashad White, Zamir White. We didn't even dive into any of that. So there's so much more to cover. We'll be going over that again next week, and then we'll be getting closer to the draft. Oh my gosh, just things are going to start rolling here as we progress through the off season. But I appreciate you all joining in. Thank you for the wonderful comments. We'll talk to you again next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.